"No lawyer, you're finished," my husband said across the courtroom. He did not whisper it. He wanted me to hear him. So did his mother, sitting 2 rows behind him in her navy Sunday coat, her gloved hands folded in her lap like she had come to church instead of a divorce hearing. When David leaned back and smiled, she smiled too. Their attorney opened his leather folder with the kind of confidence a man has when he believes the other side came empty-handed. I stood at my table alone. No lawyer. No family beside me. No one holding my hand. Then the judge lifted the first page from the file I had submitted that morning. For the first time since we walked into that courtroom, David stopped smiling. The judge looked over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Carter doesn't need a lawyer." Their attorney's face changed. He turned one page, then another. His color drained so quickly I thought he might be ill. "Oh my God," he whispered, "look at her file." And behind him, my mother-in-law made a sound I had never heard from her before. A small broken gasp. Then her body folded sideways in the courtroom pew. But that moment did not begin in court. It began in our kitchen in Akron, Ohio, with a chipped coffee mug, a stack of unpaid envelopes, and my husband standing by the sink like a stranger wearing a familiar face. My name is Susan Carter. I was 63 years old when my marriage ended in a courtroom full of people who thought silence meant weakness. For most of my adult life, I was known as David Carter's wife. Not Susan, really. Not even Mrs. Carter in a way that belonged to me. I was the woman behind the man who owned Carter and Sons Construction, though we never had sons, and the company only survived because I knew how to stretch $1 until it nearly screamed. David and I married in 1985. Back then, he had a used pickup, one decent suit, and hands rough from framing houses in the cold. I had a government job I did not talk much about, a small inheritance from my father, and a belief that marriage meant building something together brick by brick, year by year. We started with a 2-bedroom ranch on a quiet street where every neighbor knew when your porch light burned out. I planted marigolds by the mailbox. David built a workbench in the garage. On Sundays, his mother Marlene came for pot roast and reminded me that a man needed to feel like a man in his own home. I was young then. I smiled at things I would later learn to answer. For nearly 30 years, I helped David keep that business alive. When winter slowed the jobs, I balanced the books at the kitchen table after my own shifts. When suppliers threatened to cut him off, I made payment plans. When his first truck broke down, I used part of my inheritance to replace it. When the bank refused a line of credit, I sat beside him and explained the numbers better than he could. He used to squeeze my hand under the table and say, "Sue's the smart one." I used to believe he meant it as love. We had one daughter, Rachel, born after a difficult pregnancy that nearly took me out of the workforce for good. I missed promotions after that. I turned down travel. I chose assignments that let me be home before dinner when I could. My work was steady, quiet, and classified enough that people stopped asking when I gave vague answers. Administrative compliance, I would say. Records and analysis. Federal work. That was enough for most people. David knew more than that, but not all of it. Nobody did. I had spent years in military intelligence support and later federal compliance operations where small details could change everything. A missing date. A mismatched signature. A number that moved from one account to another without explanation. I learned early that memory was not evidence. Paper was. David never liked that part of me. Not openly, not at first. At first he joked about it. "There she goes," he would say, watching me label folders. My little file cabinet. But whenever something needed saving, he came to that file cabinet. A tax audit in 1998. A subcontractor dispute in 2004. A workers' compensation claim in 2011. Each time I found the document, the receipt, the copy, the note written on the back of an envelope. Each time David walked away, relieved. Each time he forgot who had protected him. The change was not sudden. That is what people misunderstand about betrayal. It does not usually kick the door in. It moves into the spare room first. It eats breakfast with you. It asks where the clean towels are. David began changing around the time he turned 60. The business had finally become stable. Not rich, but comfortable. We had a paid-off house, 2 rental properties, decent savings, and the kind of reputation older contractors earn by showing up when they say they will. Then he met a new group of men at the country club. I still do not know why he joined. David never played golf well. He mostly liked being around men who wore expensive watches and complained about taxes over lunch. He started buying things we did not need. A new truck with heated leather seats. A boat he used 3 times. A watch that cost more than our first car. When I questioned him, he said, "We're not poor anymore, Susan." I said no, and I'd like to keep it that way. He looked at me then with something colder than annoyance. "You always know how to make a man feel small." After that, the comments grew sharper. At dinner with friends, he called me the paperwork police. At his mother's house, he joked that I still thought we were living paycheck to paycheck. Marlene loved those moments. "My son worked hard," she would say, stirring sugar into her tea. "A wife should let a man enjoy what he built." What he built. Those 3 words began following me around the house. I heard them while folding his shirts, while paying insurance premiums, while cleaning out the guest room after Marlene's second fall when she moved in with us for 9 months and treated me like hired help. I cooked her soft food, changed her sheets, drove her to therapy, helped her bathe when pride made her cruel. And when she improved enough to return home, she kissed David's cheek and said, "I don't know what I'd do without my boy." David smiled. I stood in the hallway holding a basket of laundry. No one looked at me. By the time I retired, I had learned not to expect gratitude. I thought that made me peaceful. Looking back, I think it made me tired. The morning I found the divorce papers, it was raining. Not a dramatic storm. Just steady Ohio rain tapping against the kitchen window. David had left his gym bag on a chair. A corner of a manila envelope stuck out from under a towel. I would not have touched it except the envelope had my full legal name printed across the front. Susan Elaine Carter. Inside were copies of filings, asset summaries, preliminary claims, a petition for divorce already prepared. My husband of 38 years was not planning to talk to me. He was planning to serve me. I stood in that kitchen with rain sliding down the glass and read the sentence that told me everything. Petitioner asserts respondent made no substantial financial contribution to Carter & Sons construction or related marital assets. No substantial contribution. I read it twice. Then I sat down at the table where I had balanced his books for half my life. David came home an hour later carrying coffee, cheerful as a man who believed his secret was still safe. He stopped when he saw the papers. For a second there was something like shame in his face. Then it disappeared. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When..." He set the coffee on the counter. "After I had everything organized." Everything! That was the word he used for a marriage. I looked at him, really looked, and saw how prepared he was, not emotionally, strategically. "You're saying I contributed nothing?" His jaw tightened. "Legally, it's complicated." "No," I said. "It's cruel. Complicated is what people say when cruel sounds too honest." He sighed like I was embarrassing him. "Susan, don't make this ugly." Something quiet settled in me then. Not rage. Not panic. A kind of stillness I recognized from long ago, from rooms where people lied under fluorescent lights and expected their confidence to do the work facts would not. I folded the papers once. Then again. David watched me. "You should get a lawyer," he said. I looked toward the rain, then back at him. "I'll think about it." He mistook that for fear. That was his first mistake. For the first few days after I found the divorce papers, I did exactly what David expected me to do. Nothing. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. I still watered the flowers. Still went grocery shopping on Thursdays. Still attended church on Sunday. Still called my daughter Rachel every Wednesday evening. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't threaten David. I didn't tell neighbors. I didn't post anything online. And because I stayed quiet, David became more confident. People often mistake silence for surrender. That mistake has ruined a lot of careers. And eventually it ruined David's case. 3 weeks after I found the papers, David officially served me. A young process server knocked on my front door at 10:12 in the morning. I signed the receipt, thanked him, closed the door. Then I made myself a cup of tea before opening the packet. I already knew what was inside. The actual contents were worse than I expected. The filings painted a version of our marriage that barely resembled reality. According to David's legal position, Carter & Sons construction had been built almost entirely through his labor and leadership. According to David, my inheritance had been a gift with no expectation of ownership. According to David, several properties had been acquired solely through business revenue. According to David, I had provided emotional support but little measurable financial contribution. Emotional support. After 38 years, I actually laughed when I read that phrase. Not because it was funny. Because it was so astonishingly dishonest. I sat at the kitchen table and read every page twice. Then I began making notes. Nothing emotional. Just facts. Dates. Names. Transactions. Property purchases. Loan agreements. Account transfers. The same way I had done for decades. That night, David came home carrying takeout from a steakhouse. As if we were still pretending to be husband and wife, he placed a container in front of me. "You should eat." I looked at him. You've already told a court I contributed nothing to our life together. His eyes shifted away. That's legal strategy. There it was again. The language people use when they don't want to say what they're actually doing. Legal strategy, business decision, necessary step, complicated situation, words designed to make betrayal sound respectable. I pushed the food away. I hope your strategy works. He frowned. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. For a moment he looked uncomfortable. Then the confidence returned. He had convinced himself that the paperwork would protect him. Many people do. They believe confidence is evidence. It isn't. A week later I learned the full extent of their plan. Rachel came over for dinner carrying a worried expression. She was 40 years old now, married with 2 teenagers of her own. Good heart, good mother. But she hated conflict. Always had. She sat across from me and wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. Dad says things are getting ugly. I smiled sadly. Funny, he started the fight. Rachel looked down. He says you should settle. Of course he does. He says lawyers will drain everything. I noticed something then. She wasn't repeating her own thoughts. She was repeating his. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Rachel meant harm. Because David had already started shaping the narrative. I asked gently, what exactly has your father told you? She hesitated, then spoke carefully. He says the business was mostly his. Mostly. Interesting word. He says Grandma remembers things that way too. That one didn't surprise me at all. Marlene had been rewriting history for years. In her version of the world, David succeeded because he was exceptional. Any contribution from anyone else was temporary assistance. Never partnership. Never sacrifice. Never shared ownership. I changed the subject. There was no point arguing with Rachel. Not yet. A few days later, I received copies of additional financial disclosures. That's when I noticed something strange. Several records were missing. Not misplaced. Missing. Important records. Early business documents, original financing paperwork, certain property acquisition records. Documents I knew had existed because I had personally handled them. At first, I assumed the omission was accidental. Then I found another missing category. And another. Patterns started appearing. When you've spent years analyzing records, patterns become difficult to ignore. I sat at my desk for nearly 3 hours reviewing the disclosures. By the end, I wasn't angry. I was curious, and curiosity is far more dangerous, especially when facts are involved. The next morning, I drove to Marlene's house. Not to argue. To observe. She answered the door wearing a cardigan and the expression of someone already prepared for battle. What do you want? I almost smiled. Not hello. Not how are you. Straight to hostility. Marlene, I'd like to talk. I think you've caused enough trouble. There it was. The astonishing confidence of people who have convinced themselves they're the victims. I stepped inside anyway. She didn't stop me. The living room looked exactly the same as it had 20 years earlier. Same furniture. Same photographs. Same family portraits where I always stood slightly behind David. Marlene sat in her chair. You should take the settlement. I haven't seen a settlement. You will. I nodded. Then I asked the question I had come to ask. Do you really believe I contributed nothing? She didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Finally, she said, David built that company. I looked around the room. Family photos, holiday gatherings, birthdays, anniversaries, 38 years of evidence. And somehow none of it mattered. You remember when he almost lost the company in 1997? Her eyes narrowed. What about it? I paid the equipment loan. Silence. I remember. With my inheritance. Another silence. Then she waved her hand dismissively. That was years ago. Years ago. As if time erased facts. As if sacrifice expired. I stood. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For helping me understand. On the drive home, I realized something important. Neither David nor Marlene feared the truth. They genuinely believed their version of it. That made them careless. Careless people leave evidence. And evidence leaves trails. The following week, I started going through old storage areas. Closets, cabinets, boxes in the basement, shelves in the garage. Not because I was looking for anything specific, because experience had taught me something simple. When people stop valuing records, records become invisible. And invisible things are often forgotten. 3 afternoons later, I was standing in a dusty storage room behind the garage. A room nobody had touched in years. Old paint cans, holiday decorations, broken tools, water-stained boxes. The smell of dust and cardboard filled the air. I nearly left. Then I noticed a gray plastic container pushed behind a shelving unit. I didn't recognize it, which was unusual. I remembered almost everything we stored. I pulled it forward. The lid was cracked. No label, no markings. Just an old, forgotten container. When I opened it, my heartbeat slowed. Not sped up, slowed. The way it always had when I stumbled onto something important. Inside were folders, dozens of them. Original documents, contracts, property records, early business paperwork, copies I thought had disappeared years ago. And sitting on top of everything was a signed document bearing David's signature. A document I hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. I stared at it, then sat down on the concrete floor. Outside I could hear distant lawnmowers and neighborhood dogs barking. Ordinary sounds, an ordinary afternoon. But in that moment I knew something David didn't. The story they planned to tell in court was built on missing pieces. And I had just found the box containing them. I didn't tell anyone about the box. Not Rachel. Not a friend. Not even the attorney whose business card had been sitting untouched in my kitchen drawer for nearly a month. I simply carried the container into my home office, locked the door, and started sorting. The first thing I learned in federal compliance work was simple. Never assume a document matters because it looks important. And never assume a document is unimportant because it looks ordinary. Sometimes a billion-dollar mistake hides in a one-page memo. Sometimes a marriage hides inside a canceled check. So I worked methodically, one folder at a time, one document at a time, one fact at a time. The gray box held nearly 3 decades of history. Original partnership discussions, business financing applications, property transactions, tax records, loan agreements, insurance schedules, corporate filings, handwritten notes, letters from banks, correspondence from accountants. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Not because I discovered new facts, because I rediscovered forgotten ones. Facts David had stopped seeing years ago. Facts Marlene had rewritten in her memory. Facts that didn't care what anyone believed. Facts that simply existed. By the second day, I found the first major contradiction. In court filings, David claimed the company had been built entirely through business revenue and his labor. Yet sitting in front of me was a loan guarantee application from 1997. My name appeared throughout the document. Not as a spouse, not as a witness, as the guarantor. The bank had approved financing because of my financial position. Without my assets, the loan would have been denied. I remembered that meeting. The banker had looked directly at me. Not David. Me. At the time, the construction company was struggling after 2 large clients delayed payment. Payroll was at risk. Equipment bills were overdue. David was terrified. He barely slept for weeks. The day the loan was approved, he sat in the parking lot and cried. Then he hugged me. "I'll never forget this," he said. I stared at the document. Apparently he had. I placed it into a growing evidence binder. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted accuracy. There is a difference. A very important difference. The next discovery came 2 days later. Property records. 3 rental homes purchased between 2001 and 2010. According to David's filings, they were primarily acquired through business profits. Technically true, but only partially true. The original down payments came from accounts connected to my inheritance. I found wire transfer records, bank statements, signed acknowledgments, even handwritten notes from our accountant documenting the source of funds. Every piece fit together like a puzzle. Not dramatic, not emotional, just undeniable. I worked quietly for hours each day. Morning coffee, documents, lunch, documents, dinner, documents. The routine reminded me of another life, one where evidence mattered more than opinions, one where people often arrived confident and left embarrassed. Because confidence is easy, documentation is harder. Around that time, David started becoming unusually cheerful. The closer court dates came, the more relaxed he seemed. One evening he walked into the kitchen carrying golf clubs. Golf clubs, while our marriage was collapsing. "Playing tomorrow?" I asked. He nodded. "With the guys." I watched him place the clubs near the door. He looked lighter than he had in months. Almost excited. That bothered me. Not because he seemed happy. Because he seemed certain. Certainty can be dangerous, especially when it's built on incomplete information. A few days later, I accidentally overheard part of a conversation. David was on the back patio speaking to someone from the country club. The sliding door was partially open. I wasn't trying to listen. But then I heard my name. "She doesn't even have a lawyer." A laugh. Then David's voice. "Exactly." More laughter. "She doesn't understand how this works." I stood frozen, coffee cup in hand, listening. "I'll be fine," David said. "The attorney says we've got a strong case." Strong case. Maybe. Strong facts. That was another question entirely. The following Sunday, Rachel visited again. This time she seemed more nervous. She lingered after dinner while David left to meet friends. Eventually she spoke. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why don't you have a lawyer?" I smiled. The question was everywhere now. Family, friends, neighbors. Apparently, an older woman facing divorce without immediate legal representation had become a topic of concern. "I haven't decided what I need yet." Rachel frowned. "Dad says you're making a mistake." There was no anger in her voice, only worry. I looked at my daughter carefully. She wasn't choosing sides, she was afraid. Afraid her family was breaking apart. Afraid one parent would destroy the other. Afraid she would lose both. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Rachel." "Yeah." "Do you trust me?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Then trust me a little longer." Tears filled her eyes, not because of the divorce, because she could feel something changing, a shift she couldn't quite identify. For years she had known me as calm, reliable, predictable. Now she was beginning to realize there were parts of my life she had never fully understood. That realization frightened her, and in truth it saddened me. I had spent so many years protecting everyone else that I had become nearly invisible. A week later I made the discovery that changed everything. The document was buried near the bottom of the final folder. 3 pages, signed, dated, notarized, legally valid. I stared at it for several minutes before reading it a second time, then a third, then a fourth, because I wanted to be absolutely certain. The agreement had been drafted during one of the company's earliest financial crises. At the time, my inheritance had been used to save the business. In exchange, ownership interests were formally documented. Not 50%, not controlling ownership, but substantial, very substantial, enough to completely destroy the narrative David intended to present in court. Most shocking of all, the agreement contained David's signature, his initials on every page, his acknowledgement of my financial contribution, his acknowledgement of my ownership rights, his acknowledgement that certain future assets would be considered jointly derived. I leaned back in my chair. The room was silent. For a moment I closed my eyes, not because I felt victorious, because I felt sad. The truth had been sitting inside a forgotten box for nearly 30 years. The truth hadn't disappeared. David simply stopped respecting it. That evening I made a decision. I would not reveal the document. Not yet. I would not call David. I would not threaten him. I would not negotiate. I would simply continue organizing, building, preparing, the way I always had. By now I had assembled several large binders, every document cross-referenced, every date verified, every transaction supported, every claim traceable. The process felt familiar, comforting even, like returning to a language I hadn't spoken in years. Meanwhile, David grew bolder. Friends stopped by the house. I heard conversations, predictions, assumptions. One afternoon, a neighbor unknowingly repeated something David had said at the country club. "He's confident you'll settle," I smiled. "I'm sure he is." The neighbor chuckled. "He said you won't survive court." That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt, because it revealed how completely David misunderstood the situation. He thought court was a contest of confidence. I knew it was a contest of evidence, and evidence doesn't care who is louder. The first major hearing was now only days away. The binders sat neatly stacked in my office. The signed agreement rested inside the final volume. I looked at them late one evening before turning off the light. Then I closed the door. Outside the house was quiet. David was asleep upstairs, completely unaware of what waited inside those pages. For the first time since finding the divorce papers, I felt something close to peace. Not because I knew I would win, because I finally knew the truth would have a chance to speak. And unlike people, the truth never gets nervous in a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was nervous, because old habits die hard. For most of my adult life, important days started early. I made coffee, fed the birds that visited the feeder outside my kitchen window, watched the sky slowly brighten over the quiet Ohio neighborhood. Everything looked ordinary, which felt strange, because by the end of the day, nearly 4 decades of my life would be sitting on a judge's desk. At 7 o'clock, I dressed carefully. Nothing dramatic, no expensive suit, no attempt to look powerful. Just a navy blouse, a gray jacket, and the pearl earrings my father had given my mother before she died. The same earrings I wore when Rachel graduated high school. The same earrings I wore at my retirement ceremony. The same earrings I wore when David and I celebrated our 30th anniversary. Funny how objects survive things people don't. I loaded 3 binders into my car. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. The boxes looked ridiculous, like I was moving into the courthouse. But I carried them anyway, one trip at a time. Every page mattered. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was already filling. Attorneys carrying briefcases, couples avoiding eye contact, families waiting for inheritance disputes, the usual human sadness that gathers around courthouses. Inside, I found a seat and quietly waited. Then David arrived. And for the first time, I understood exactly how confident he had become. He was wearing a new charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, an expensive watch. The country club version of David, not the man who once ate peanut butter sandwiches in a pickup truck because we couldn't afford lunch. His attorney walked beside him, tall, polished, confident, the kind of lawyer who billed by the hour and knew it. Behind them came Marlene. She looked almost cheerful, like someone attending a graduation ceremony. When she saw me, she gave a small smile, not kindness, victory, or what she believed was victory. David noticed the binders beside me. His eyebrows lifted. "What are those records?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Susan, this isn't an IRS audit." I smiled. "No, it isn't." He glanced toward his attorney. The attorney looked mildly amused. Then David noticed something else. The empty chair beside me. "No lawyer." I simply looked at him. His confidence grew. I could practically see it. Like someone watching an opponent arrive without armor. "You really should have hired someone." "I appreciate the concern." That answer irritated him. David always hated calmness when he wanted conflict. The bailiff opened the courtroom. People began filing inside. The hearing room itself wasn't large. A typical county courtroom. Wood paneling, American flag, state flag, rows of benches. Nothing dramatic. Real life rarely is. David and his attorney took their places. Marlene sat directly behind them. I sat alone. And that seemed to fascinate everyone. A woman in her 60s. No attorney. 5 binders. No visible strategy. No visible support. To most people, I probably looked overwhelmed. Good. Appearances can be useful. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. David's attorney wasted no time. He was skilled. I'll give him that. Confident. Organized. Professional. He presented a clean narrative. A simple narrative. The most dangerous kind. According to him, David had built a successful construction company through decades of labor and risk. According to him, I had benefited from that success, but played only a supporting role. According to him, most significant assets were tied directly to David's efforts. The presentation sounded reasonable. That was the problem. The best lies usually contain enough truth to feel comfortable. The attorney spoke for nearly 40 minutes. Documents appeared on screens. Financial summaries, property valuations, business reports. Everything carefully arranged. Everything designed to support one conclusion. Then he finished and sat down smiling. The judge looked toward me. "Mrs. Carter." The room became quiet. I stood. Every eye followed me. "Your Honor." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Are you representing yourself today?" "Yes, sir." A brief pause. "Do you understand the risks associated with self-representation?" "I do." Another pause. The judge studied me. Not dismissively, curiously, perhaps wondering whether I fully understood what I was doing. I understood perfectly. "Would you like additional time to obtain counsel?" he asked. "No, Your Honor." Across the room, I saw David shift comfortably in his chair. Everything was unfolding exactly as he expected. Then the judge nodded. "Proceed." I walked toward the evidence table carrying the first binder. Nothing dramatic. No speech. No emotional statement. Just paper. I placed the binder before the clerk. Then another. Then another. Then another. Then the final binder. The stack looked enormous. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. David's attorney frowned. For the first time all morning, the judge looked at the binders. "What are these? Supporting documentation." "Supporting what?" "The facts." A few people exchanged glances. I almost smiled. The attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have not reviewed these materials." "Correct," I said, "because they were disclosed according to procedural requirements." The attorney's expression tightened. He checked his notes, then checked them again. The judge opened the first binder. A few pages, then a few more. The room remained silent. The judge continued reading, then stopped. looked back. Read something again. His expression changed slightly, not dramatically. Just enough. The way a doctor changes expression after seeing a test result. The attorney noticed. So did David. The judge turned another page, then another. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Carter? Yes, Your Honor. These records appear exceptionally organized. Thank you. Did an attorney prepare these? No. A pause. Then, who prepared them? I did. The attorney shifted in his seat. David no longer looked comfortable. The judge returned to reading. 10 more minutes passed. Then 15. Occasionally he made notes. Occasionally he marked pages. Occasionally he asked for specific references. Each time I provided them immediately. Volume, section, page number, date, supporting exhibit. The courtroom atmosphere slowly changed. Not dramatically, quietly, like air pressure before a storm. David began whispering to his attorney. The attorney began reviewing documents more aggressively. Marlene's smile disappeared. For the first time that morning, she looked uncertain. Eventually, the judge closed the binder. Then the next. Then another. He leaned back, removed his glasses, and looked directly at David's attorney. Counselor? Yes, Your Honor. I believe further review is necessary. The attorney hesitated. Of course. The judge glanced toward the stack again, then toward me, then back toward David. The silence felt heavy, meaningful, the kind of silence that tells experienced people something important is happening. Finally, the judge spoke. This matter will be continued pending review of submitted evidence. David immediately stood. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand, not angry. Final. David sat down. The hearing was over, at least for today. People began gathering their belongings. Whispers spread throughout the courtroom. The attorney approached David. Neither looked pleased. I quietly packed my materials, one binder at a time. No celebration. No satisfaction. Just work. As I lifted the final box, I overheard the attorney speaking softly. His voice was lower now, more cautious. What exactly did she do for a living? David looked confused. What? The attorney repeated the question, and for the first time in 38 years, I realized something remarkable. My husband had spent decades beside me, yet he never truly knew who I was. As I walked out of the courthouse carrying those binders, I could feel it. The shift. Small, invisible, but real. David still believed he would win. That was obvious. But certainty had disappeared from his face, and once certainty cracks, fear finds its way inside. The second hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. 3 very uncomfortable weeks, especially for David. The first hearing had changed something. Not publicly. Not officially. But anyone paying attention could feel it. The confidence was gone. Not completely, but enough. David still believed he would win. He just no longer believed it would be easy. Meanwhile, I continued my normal life. I attended church, visited Rachel and the grandchildren, volunteered twice a week at the local food pantry, paid bills, mowed the lawn, folded laundry. The ordinary things people do while carrying extraordinary burdens. David, however, grew increasingly restless. Every day he spent more time on the phone, more meetings with attorneys, more conversations behind closed doors. One evening I walked into the kitchen and found him staring at me, not angrily, suspiciously, like a man trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, he asked, "What exactly did you do for the government?" I almost laughed. After 38 years, now he wanted to know. Administrative work. You know that's not true. I poured a cup of coffee. I never lied. You never explained. No. He waited. I said nothing. Eventually, he shook his head. You've changed. I looked at him. No, David. A pause. You just stopped paying attention. For a moment, he looked wounded. Then the moment passed. The next morning, Rachel called. Mom, you sound worried. I am. I could hear her pacing. The same way she used to pace before school presentations. Dad says things aren't going well. I smiled. Interesting. A month earlier, he had been promising victory. Now he was expressing concern. Progress. What exactly did he say? He said the judge is asking questions. That made sense. Judges tend to ask questions when evidence appears, especially evidence nobody expected. Rachel hesitated, then asked quietly, Mom, are you going to destroy him? The question surprised me. Not because she asked, because she believed it might be possible. I sat down. No. Really? No. Even after everything, I looked out the window. The maple tree in the yard was beginning to change colors. Autumn arriving. Another season. Another reminder that life keeps moving. I don't want to destroy your father. What do you want? The truth. Rachel became quiet. Then she whispered, I think that's what he's afraid of. After the call ended, I sat alone for a long time, thinking, not about court, about fear. David wasn't afraid of losing money. Not really. He had recovered from financial setbacks before. He wasn't afraid of divorce. That decision had been his. What frightened him was something deeper. Exposure. The realization that the story he'd been telling himself for years might not survive public examination. People can survive failure. What they struggle to survive is the collapse of their own mythology. The morning of the final hearing arrived cold and gray. Typical Ohio weather. The courthouse looked exactly as it had before. Brick walls, metal detectors, fluorescent lights. Ordinary. Yet everything felt different. When I entered the courtroom, David was already there. His attorney sat beside him. Neither looked relaxed. Marlene was present too, though she seemed smaller somehow, less certain. Age had always been visible in her face. Today it looked heavier. When she saw me, she didn't smile. That was new. I took my seat. Alone. Again. The room slowly filled. Then the judge entered. Everyone stood. And the hearing began. David's attorney started first. His presentation was noticeably different this time. Less aggressive. More cautious. He spent much of his argument attempting to explain inconsistencies, reframe transactions, interpret agreements, challenge conclusions. The problem was simple. Facts don't care about interpretation as much as attorneys do. Eventually he finished. The judge turned toward me. Mrs. Carter. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to add? I stood, then handed over one final binder. The last binder. The most important one. The agreement. The forgotten document. The document David himself had signed nearly 30 years earlier. The courtroom became silent. The judge opened it. Read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the air seemed still. I watched David. At first he looked confused. Then uncertain. Then concerned. Then something else. Recognition. He remembered. Not all at once, but enough. I saw it happen. His face changed. A memory returning. The bank crisis. The inheritance. The agreement. The signatures. The promises. The reality. His attorney leaned over. Began reading. A few seconds later his posture changed too. The color drained from his face. He flipped pages rapidly. Then more slowly. Then stopped. Oh my God. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The courtroom heard him. The judge looked up. The attorney swallowed hard. Then pointed toward the document. Look at her file. The room became absolutely silent. David stared at the agreement, his mouth slightly open. His entire case had depended on one assumption, that nobody would ever find it, or perhaps worse, that nobody would ever remember it. The judge removed his glasses, looked directly at David, then at the attorney, then back at me. Finally he spoke. A calm voice, steady, measured, but every word landed like a hammer. Mrs. Carter doesn't need a lawyer. Nobody moved. The judge continued. The documentation is exceptionally thorough. Another pause. The evidence speaks for itself. Across the room, David lowered his eyes. For the first time since the divorce began, he looked old. Not angry. Not arrogant. Old. A man suddenly confronted by the distance between who he had been and who he had become. The judge spent nearly 20 minutes summarizing findings. Ownership interests, financial contributions, property rights, tracing of assets, contractual obligations. Every major claim made by David's legal team began collapsing, one after another. Not dramatically, methodically, like dominoes. Then it happened. A sudden noise behind David. A sharp gasp. People turned. Marlene's hand flew to her chest. Her face had gone pale, extremely pale. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then she slumped sideways on the bench. Several people rushed toward her. The bailiff called for medical assistance. Paramedics were summoned. The courtroom descended into controlled chaos. I stood frozen, not out of satisfaction, out of shock. Marlene wasn't collapsing because she lost money. She wasn't collapsing because of the ruling. She was collapsing because reality had arrived all at once. For years, she had convinced herself that I was merely the woman standing beside her son, nothing more. Now she was being forced to confront 38 years of truth. And truth can hit harder than illness. The hearing paused while paramedics examined her. Fortunately, it wasn't a heart attack. Stress, exhaustion, elevated blood pressure. She would recover, but something else wouldn't. The version of events David and Marlene had spent years believing. When proceedings resumed, the judge delivered his ruling. The outcome wasn't close. The ownership interests were recognized. The asset division changed dramatically. Several properties were reclassified. Key claims were rejected outright. The truth had finally spoken, and it had spoken clearly. As people began leaving the courtroom, nobody looked at me the way they had before. Not as a helpless older woman, not as someone abandoned, not as someone defeated. They looked at me with something else. Respect. But the person whose reaction mattered most remained seated. David, alone, staring at the table. And for the first time I realized something surprising. Winning didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. The strangest thing about winning is that nobody tells you how quiet it feels afterward. For months, maybe years, I had imagined what this moment might look like if my marriage ever ended. I thought there would be anger, relief, celebration, something dramatic. Instead, there was silence. 3 days after the hearing, I sat alone on my back porch drinking coffee while the sun rose over the neighborhood. The same neighborhood where David and I had lived for nearly 4 decades. The same street where Rachel learned to ride a bicycle. The same porch where we hosted summer cookouts and holiday dinners. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet nothing was. The court ruling had spread quickly. Not because I told anyone. Small towns have their own communication systems. Church friends, neighbors, country club gossip. People always know more than they should. By the end of the week, several people had called. Some wanted details. Others wanted reassurance. A few simply wanted entertainment. I gave none of them what they wanted. Whenever someone asked what happened, I said the same thing. The court reviewed the facts. That answer disappointed almost everyone, which was fine with me. The truth is rarely as entertaining as the stories people invent around it. A week later, I met with the financial advisor assigned to help implement the court's ruling. A younger man. Professional. Respectful. He reviewed the numbers carefully, then looked at me. "Mrs. Carter, you understand you could pursue additional claims?" "I do. There are grounds for it. I know." He paused, clearly confused. "Then why aren't you—" I smiled. Because the answer seemed obvious. I came for fairness, not revenge. Not punishment. Fairness. The advisor nodded slowly. But I could tell he didn't fully understand. Most people don't. Especially when they've never been betrayed by someone they once loved. The desire to hurt someone back is powerful, but it has a cost. And at 63 years old, I no longer wanted to spend my remaining years paying that price. Meanwhile, David was discovering consequences that had nothing to do with money. Rachel stopped speaking to him for nearly 2 weeks. Not because of the divorce, because of the lies, the omissions, the deliberate rewriting of history. Eventually, he called me. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. "I need to talk to Rachel." "Then talk to her." "She won't answer." I stared out the window, not enjoying his discomfort, simply observing it, the same way I had observed documents, facts, consequences, cause and effect. "David, yeah. You spent years asking people to believe a version of reality that wasn't true." Silence. Then, "I know." It was the first honest thing I had heard him say in months, maybe years. The next major surprise came from Marlene. 2 weeks after her collapse, she asked to see me. I almost declined. Not because I was angry. Because I was tired. Tired of carrying relationships that only moved in one direction. But eventually I agreed. We met at a small cafe near her neighborhood. The kind of place older people like. Good pie. Reasonable coffee. Quiet enough to hear yourself think. When I arrived, she was already seated. She looked smaller than I remembered. Age had finally caught up with her. Not physically, emotionally. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "I'm sorry." 3 words, simple, awkward, uncomfortable. Possibly the hardest 3 words she had ever spoken. I studied her face, looking for excuses, qualifications, conditions. There weren't any, just regret. "I should have treated you better." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from her, like a language she had never practiced. I took a sip of coffee, then asked gently, "Why now?" Her eyes filled with tears, real tears, not manipulation, not performance, pain. Because I saw those files. Silence. She shook her head slowly. "I never knew." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was tragic. Of course she knew. She had simply never wanted to know. There is a difference. People often mistake the two. For nearly 40 years, she had benefited from my work, my care, my sacrifices. She just never gave them value. Now the evidence had forced her to see them. I was wrong, she whispered. I nodded. Because she was. And because saying it mattered. The apology didn't erase anything. But it changed something. Sometimes healing begins when someone finally stops defending the damage they caused. As autumn deepened, I began building a different kind of life. Not a dramatic one. A useful one. At church, I started helping older women understand financial records. Retirement accounts, property documents, basic legal paperwork. The kinds of things many people avoid because they seem complicated. The response surprised me. More women needed help than I expected. Widows, divorcees, caregivers, retired teachers, former nurses, women who had spent decades managing households without ever being taught how certain financial systems worked. I recognized myself in many of them, not because they were weak, because they trusted people they loved. Trust is beautiful, but trust without understanding can become dependence, and dependence can become vulnerability. One afternoon after a workshop, an elderly woman stopped me in the parking lot. She looked nervous, embarrassed. I wish I'd learned this years ago. I smiled. So do I, she laughed. Then asked something unexpected. Are you angry? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Because months earlier the answer would have been yes. Now, not exactly. Disappointed. Certainly. Sad. At times. But anger had begun fading. Like a storm moving farther offshore. I don't think so, I finally said. The woman smiled. That's good. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it was true. By early winter, the divorce was nearly finalized. The paperwork was almost complete. The legal battle was over. But one conversation still remained. The conversation David had been requesting for weeks. One final meeting. One final chance to say whatever needed saying. Eventually, I agreed. Not because I owed him anything, because I wanted to close the door properly, and because part of me suspected that for the first time in a very long time, David was finally ready to tell the truth. The final conversation happened on a cold December afternoon, the kind of Ohio day when the sky looks permanently gray and every tree appears to be waiting for spring. David suggested meeting at a small diner outside town, a place we used to visit when Rachel was young, back when a cheeseburger and a slice of pie felt like a celebration. I arrived first, ordered coffee, waited. 10 minutes later, David walked through the door. For a moment, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked different, because he looked honest. The confidence that had carried him through most of our marriage was gone. So was the arrogance. What remained was a tired, 65-year-old man finally forced to live without excuses. He sat across from me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The waitress brought coffee. We thanked her. Then silence returned. Finally, David looked down at his hands. I've been rehearsing this conversation for weeks. I smiled faintly. How's that going? A small laugh escaped him. Terribly. That was probably the most truthful answer possible. After a long pause, he spoke again. I don't think I ever properly thanked you. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they fixed anything, because they were 30 years late. You don't have to do that now? Yes, he said quietly. I do. He stared out the window. Cars moved slowly through the parking lot. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, the world continuing as if nothing had happened. I spent years convincing myself the business succeeded because of me. I remained silent. He continued. I knew you helped. Another pause. But somewhere along the way I started treating your help like it was automatic. His voice cracked slightly. Like it didn't count. For the first time since the divorce began, I saw genuine shame. Not embarrassment. Not regret over losing money. Real shame. The kind that appears when a person finally sees themselves clearly. I told myself I was the one carrying everything. He laughed bitterly. The funny thing is, the more successful I became, the less accurate that story got. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction, compassion. Because the truth was simple. David had lost something long before he lost the court case. He had lost perspective. Success had slowly convinced him that gratitude was optional, that memory was flexible. That history could be rewritten, and by the time reality caught up with him, he had forgotten who helped build the life he was so proud of. He rubbed his forehead, then asked quietly, Why didn't you destroy me? There it was. The question everyone seemed to have. The financial advisor, Rachel, friends, even strangers. Why stop at fairness? Why not take everything? I looked at the man I had once loved, the father of my daughter, the person who had hurt me more deeply than anyone else ever had. Then I answered honestly, because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life carrying you. He frowned. What does that mean? It means revenge doesn't end when the other person suffers. He stared at me. It ends when you stop needing them to. The diner became quiet. The words hung between us. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Finally, David nodded, slowly, as if understanding something for the first time. A few minutes later, he asked another question, one that mattered more. When did I lose you? I thought about it. Not the day I found the divorce papers. Not the day he filed. Not even the day he lied in court. No, I said softly. When did you stop seeing me? His eyes filled with tears. That answer hurt, because he knew it was true. Long before the divorce. Long before the courtroom. Long before the lawyers. He had stopped seeing me. Stopped noticing. Stopped appreciating. Stopped remembering. The paperwork simply exposed what already existed. When we left the diner, we stood in the parking lot for a moment. Snowflakes drifted through the cold air. Neither of us reached for the other. Neither of us pretended there was still a marriage to save. That chapter was over. And honestly, it should have been. Some relationships are repaired. Others teach lessons. This one had become a lesson. Before leaving, David surprised me one last time. I'm proud of you. I smiled. Not because I needed the validation. Because for the first time in years, the words felt genuine. Thank you. Then we said goodbye. And that was enough. A few weeks later, the divorce became final. Rachel slowly rebuilt her relationship with both of us. Not the same relationship. A healthier one. More honest. More adult. Marlene continued attending church. One Sunday, she publicly thanked me for caring for her after her stroke years earlier. The entire congregation heard it. I think it may have been the bravest thing she ever did. As for me, life became surprisingly peaceful. The workshops grew. More women attended. Then more. Eventually, we created a small community program focused on financial literacy, legal awareness, and retirement planning for older adults. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would ever make headlines. Just people helping people. The way most meaningful things happen. Sometimes women would ask me about the court case. About the binders. About the judge. About the moment everything changed. And I always gave the same answer. The courtroom didn't change my life. The preparation did. The truth did. The years of quiet work nobody noticed did. Because that's the lesson I hope people take from my story. Growing older does not make you weak. Being kind does not make you foolish. Being quiet does not mean you have nothing to say. And the people we underestimate often carry the deepest strength. The greatest revenge is not destroying someone who hurt you. It is refusing to become like them. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had to quietly prove your worth after someone dismissed you? Share your experience in the comments. And if stories about resilience, dignity, family, and second chances speak to your heart, please consider subscribing and joining us for more journeys like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the value of your own story.